Skyward, 2018, issues 1 to 5, by Joe Henderson and Lee Garbett. Content warnings/trigger warnings, PTSD and trauma stemming from a mass extinction event, violence, emotional manipulation, suicide. Joe Henderson, he/him's first exposure to comics was during the speculative boom in comics. They fondly recall the character of Darkhawk from that time. The speculative boom started in roughly 1985 and peaked around 1993 when mainstream press focused on the niche comic market's potential for making money. Mainstream comic book publishers began to pander specifically to the collector's market with variant covers, polybags for collectors to keep their unread comics pristine, and gimmick covers of a cosmetic nature that almost never extended to improved comic content. It did encourage many speculators to buy multiple copies of issues, anticipating demand would allow them to sell for a substantial profit in the future. When the speculator boom came to a bust in the mid-90s, Joe drifted from comics a bit, returning to read Michael Bryan Bendis' Ultimate Spider-Man run, and has never stopped reading comics since. Joe's Hollywood career started as an assistant on Nicolas Cage's World Trade Center movie, then as an executive story editor on 21 episodes and writer of 41 episodes of White Collar from 2009 through 2014, followed by co-executive producing 11 episodes and writing 2 episodes of 2013 TV show Graceland, then co-executive producing and writing a couple episodes of 2014's J.J. Abrams show starring Carl Urban and Michael Ealy called Almost Human. It was a one-season show filled with potential in a string of one and cancelled sci-fi shows that the Fox channel was in the habit of commissioning and killing prematurely. Almost Human was about Carl Urban as a police detective in 2048 being reluctantly paired with Michael Ealy's android partner to solve crimes. Joe was then a consulting producer on 8 episodes of 11.22.63, a James Franco time travel show about averting John F. Kennedy's death. Then from 2016 through 2021, Joe Henderson was the executive producer and showrunner for all 6 seasons of Lucifer, also credited as main showrunner on between 2 to 5 episodes of each season. Joe Henderson is the co-writer of the remake of Flight of the Navigator, currently in pre-production with Bryce Dallas Howard, attached to direct. Joe Henderson and artist Lee Garbett, after working on Skyward, have collaborated on 2 more projects since: the 2021 Image comic miniseries Shadecraft, 5 issues about the shadows coming to life, watching and trying to kill the main protagonist, which is currently being developed into a TV series by Netflix, although we've had no production updates since 2021, and the 2025 3-issue Distillery comic series The Big Burn. A reminder that Distillery is a comics publisher where creators own their own work and a piece of Distillery itself. Distillery's main drive being to create a more sustainable and equitable future for creators to counter the mistreatment of comic book creators by more traditional comic publishers. Physically published issues are published on larger pages than normal comics. I fully support there being more avenues than Image or Substack to get independent comics published, but I will note here in Australia, a single issue of a comic with no pre-order discount for a flagship character at one of the big 2 is sitting at $10 AUD an issue, whereas a single issue from Distillery, whilst nearly double the page count, costs 18 AUD an issue, which is prohibitively costly when your average trade, collecting 5 issues of 22 pages from one of the big 2, each sits at around the 20 to 25 AUD mark. I've also heard from at least one comic selling company in Australia that Distillery books in 2025 have often encountered delays hitting the shelves with minimal communication to the comic sellers. Part of this could be attributed to the Diamond bankruptcy, which forced Distillery to reboot the entire print side of their company, eventually partnering with Penguin Random House. But there's also series that were meant to be ongoing that have dropped in issue 1, then have had no sequel issues and 0 news of when or if sequel issues will occur, and there's been comics announced that have never been published at all with any issues. In addition, their digital platform only lets you read the issues through their reader, their exclusive reader, even those obtained through Humble Bundles, which for anybody who's been burnt by Comixology or any other digital comic purchasing platform is just a bit of a non-starter, because there's 0 security that any of your digital purchases will still be around in 3 months' time should that publisher potentially fold. That said, Henderson and Garbett's The Big Burn is one of the Distillery's few books that has published its entire series of 3 issues on time. The series about a 21st century Bonnie and Clyde who pull off impossible heists, but after one goes wrong, they accept an offer from the devil, exchanging freedom for their souls. They discover without their souls, their love for each other is missing too, so they recruit a crew for the ultimate heist, break into hell, and steal their souls back. Garbett, he, him pronouns. A New York Times bestselling artist, is the brother of 2 siblings 15 years older than him. Those siblings had a massive suitcase of Marvel comics that Lee was never allowed to go into, and the siblings guarded from him, which meant whenever they were at the house, he'd be breaking in there. So his earliest memories of comics are the 1970s ones, which he'd scribble over and ruin. Lee is a big fan of the Avengers of that era, specifically recalling the Buscema Avengers covers, of which Vision was his favorite as a child, and 1970s Spider-Man comics too. Lee Garbett's DC work includes being one of the artists who contributed to Grant Morrison's Batman run, working on the 2015 run of Lucifer comics, though the run was rendered non-canon by the 2018 subsequent Lucifer run, was the main artist on the second half of the 2007 Midnighter run, and Lee Garbett did art for half of the 2009 Batgirl series, starring Stephanie Brown as Batgirl. That Batgirl run is generally beloved. It only concluded thanks to the 2011 DC Universe reboot. Lee Garbett was also the main artist on The Highwaymen, a co-creator-owned title for DC and Wildstorm, a 5-issue series from 2007 about retired covert couriers coming out of retirement for one last cargo delivery requested by a dead president, which is currently in development to be adapted with New Line Cinema. The project has no connection to the 2019 film of the same name starring Woody Harrelson, Kevin Costner, and Kathy Bates. Lee Garbett's Marvel work includes the 2023 Groot series, the 2021 Death of Doctor Strange, and 2022 Strange series with Clea, taking over the role of Sorcerer Supreme of the main Marvel comic universe. The 2019 run of Captain Marvel worked on Amazing Spider-Man, that book being one of many pencilers during the Big Time era, and was most notably the artist for Loki, Agent of Asgard, covered by the Eto comic cast, although they only covered the writer's bio and skipped over the art team during that recording for time. Lee was contacted by Joe because 1, he was the artist on Lucifer at the time, and 2, he'd done Loki, Agent of Asgard, which Joe loved. Coming from TV, Joe had worked up a couple of spec scripts of the first 2 issues to make sure he got the medium correct, and after a Comic-Con DM'd asking if Lee knew an artist that he would or could refer Joe to, that'd want to take a chance on a first-time comic book writer. Lee read the opening sequence, the imagery popped in his head as to how he would draw it, and knew he had to be the one to do it, not somebody else, and within 2 days, Lee had agreed to work with Joe on the Skyward book. The duo pitched Skyward to a couple of places, but Image was always the goal, because that's where you get to keep the IP rights if you want to develop it further. Skyward was optioned by Sony Entertainment for movie development. No recent updates on that one, though. Lee has produced concept design and promotional imagery for several movies, including X-Men Days of Future Past and Mile 22, and worked on various ad campaigns and poster designs for the likes of Lucasfilm, Warner Brothers, and the Jim Henson Company. Lee has done variant covers for Marvel's 2023 Doctor Strange book, the 2022 Defenders Beyond, and DC's 2025 book Absolute Martian Manhunter. Starting in March 2026, Lee Garbett will be teaming up with writer Stephanie Phillips, most recently writer of the 2024 Phoenix and Spider-Gwen Ghost Spider series for Marvel, and writer of the first 27 issues of the 2021 Harley Quinn series with Riley Rossmo for DC, and wrote Boom's Grimm series. Lee Garbett and Stephanie Phillips will be working together on the relaunched and renumbered ongoing Daredevil series. Stephanie Phillips will be only the 2nd or 3rd female writer ever to have worked on the main Daredevil series, the first having been Ann Nocenti, and Eric Schultz having written the Daredevil Without Fear miniseries and contributed to a couple of Daredevil annuals and tie-in comics. Skyward 2018 Issue 1 Recap. The concept of Skyward came from Joe Henderson's childhood, when Joe would lie in the backyard looking up the sky and wonder, why is nobody ever else terrified that there is nothing there above us, sucking us off into space? Then he'd imagine how he'd navigate around in a world with reduced gravity. It led to a mix of wonder and terror for gravity, which percolated away in the back of his head, unbeknownst to Joe, into adulthood. The best kinds of stories to Joe are those that mix wonder with stakes. Joe was originally considering pitching the idea of a low-gravity movie to Hollywood, where he worked, but his friend told him that would never take off, it's too expensive, but you're always reading comics. That's where you should tell your story. In the early stages of his development process for Skyward, Joe reached out to the Scientific Exchange in Hollywood, where they pair creators with scientists, and when Joe was pitching ideas for the Skyward series to the scientists and asking how would they work, the response was, it wouldn't. So to make the world work, it was a lot of looking at NASA research and looking at what could feel true and real, even if it was a departure from reality. One thing Joe wanted to include was showing fire in low gravity, which apparently resembles jellyfish in appearance. Then Lee had to find a way to find a middle ground for it, of still making it look like fire so the audience could identify it as a threat. One day, everything on Earth starts defying gravity, and infant Willa's mom and Nate's husband Lily hold space. Wait. Checks notes. Is jettisoned into space as Earth's gravity becomes a fraction of what it normally is. 2 decades later, humanity has adapted to their new environment, except for Willa's dad, Nate, who has unresolved trauma and PTSD from watching his wife get sucked off into outer space, which triggered an extreme case of agoraphobia, an anxiety disorder that prevents one from leaving their home, due to a perception of all external environments being unsafe. Nate is determined to restore Earth's gravity to the norm that he's comfortable with and believes he has found a way. Meanwhile, Willa Fowler, a young woman whose entire life can only remember the low-gravity world in which she inhabits, is fully acclimatized to this new reality. Vestiges of the past like crossing ahead signs Road signs are bizarre relics of the past, similar to today's youth scratching their head if they see a VHS tape. Willa uses fire extinguishers as a jetpack when needing to propel through the air. Willa's character design was largely based on actual career outfits, but with the added element of the fire extinguisher instead of something fancier for the jetpack to indicate the character's scrappy economic standing. We're introduced to Joan, a local neighbour who wears a weighted vest attached to a harness to get around, and we're introduced to Edison, Willa's crush and co-worker, at a parcel delivery depot who's old enough to remember the before times when Earth's gravity was fully present, where life was more difficult for him to get around, substantially more restricted because his legs ended his kneecaps. And as Edison's mind, G-Day is the best thing to have ever happened, a moral counterpoint to everything Willa gets from her dad Nate at home. After a conversation where Edison is a little sexist and Willa a little ableist, Edison leaves in a huff and Shirley gives Willa a parcel to deliver. Willa is ambushed by a couple of hooligans while trying to make the delivery and fires a gun at the ground. The hooligans, thinking she's crazy because the recoil of the gun sends her soaring in the opposite direction of the bullet, rapidly flying upwards into the sky. Not finding anything solid to grapple onto, Willa fires a second bullet at the sky, sending her hurtling away from the bullet, Willa banging into the ground. Willa successfully makes her delivery, milk containers with straws to children. Willa ends the issue in an argument with her father, Willa wanting to leave the city of Chicago and explore the world, while Nate, adamant that the sky kills, is adamant it's too dangerous and he should have never let her leave the apartment, having tried in the past to keep her locked in there. Issue 1 thoughts from the comic reading community. Joshy's thoughts. I love the juxtaposition of the extreme loss of life on G-Day cutting abruptly to post-G-Day with the youthful love of life seen through the lens of Willa as the main protagonist. Willa feels very teenagery in how she acts, brash decisions without thinking through the consequences, passionate about going out to see the world and explore. Jade's thoughts. Hit by a car in the sky, what's rotten luck? Jade is of the view that this is doing all the right first issue stuff. It flips the reader from the ordinary world into the chaos of the new normal. It introduces a bunch of characters who promise to be interesting later, and suggests with its last line where the series is going to go. Probably. Jade hasn't read further than Volume 1 yet. Warp's thoughts. Warp thought the first issue did a great job of setting up the world without giving away the whole thing, or relying on large exposition dumps. Details like kids and the teacher, all tethered together, make for a great world building through visuals rather than text. But Wobbs did have 2 issues with his issues. The first is a small one that doesn't really bother him because it's cool. Guns don't have that much recoil, so you'll float backwards, but it won't be that dramatic. The second issue is a bit more real. Wobbs wishes the dad died instead of the mom. The story could stay the same, just put the dad in the fridge instead of the mom. Animal thoughts. Animal thought this issue served as a reasonably effective introduction. Comic opens with a mass casualty event, but Henderson smartly zeroes in on just one family and their personal tragedy. I'm also liked Willa's character design, even though her massive floating curly hair probably wouldn't be very practical in low gravity. She is a fun character to root for. I'm found a failure to flirt with Henderson to be very relatable, as well as her frustration at being stuck in Chicago. Yet Henderson takes care to show us that Willa is a good-hearted person at her core, both in her concern for her father and her service to her community at large, through delivering the milk to the children. Skyward 2018, Issue 2 Recap. Willa thinks her dad Nate is crazy and leaves. We learn that Willa has had to take the job at the delivery center to pay the rent, and that Shirley has been more of a parent than her dad has. We learn that Shirley traveled 100 miles outside the city limits on flat ground with others, losing a lot of people along the way, many floating up and never stopping. Edison and Willa reconcile. Nate and Roger Barrow worked on a project studying the gravitational field around the planet, having discovered tiny anomalies in Earth's gravity, and that gravity worked differently to how humans have always thought, and knew that G-Day, the day the gravity altered, was coming. Willa, upon learning that her dad Nate knew Roger Barrow, a man on the TV that's very affluent and influential in the current society, thinks Roger can talk some sense into her dad and heads to the streets, the ground level of Chicago. The ground level is where the rich and elite of society live, rich enough to create devices like magnetic hems and anti-grav boots to keep them grounded instead of adapting to a world with lower gravity, unable and unwilling to accept that the world has changed. As a side note, Joe and Lee were originally thinking of giving Willa an afro in the character design stage comic, but decided against it as they wanted her hair to have a life of its own, able to convey and express emotion, so they opted for the longer, partially curled style instead. It takes 2 attempts to get into the party where Roger is, the first time going disastrously as Willa naively approaches like a topsider, in addition to having the safety precaution of a firearm strapped to her side, which apparently isn't a norm for those who opt to float. She chases a guard's anti-grav boot also known as a mag's shoe, to escape, causing his demagnetized boots and the guard to drift into the air. Willa narrowly avoids additional security on jetpacks thanks to Edison dragging her into the shadows, having followed her down to assist. Edison gives her a pair of expensive mag shoes. A later issue values them at costing 10,000 American dollars and looks after her gun, allowing her to awkwardly walk straight on into the party and talk to Roger. Roger thought Nate Fowler had been dead for 20 years and is going to use Willa to lead Roger Barrow straight to Nate to, dun dun dun, kill him. Issue 2's thoughts by the general comic reading community. Wobb's thoughts. Wobb's love the idea of how the rich people live on the street. It's a nice version of the common trope of rich people living up the top of future civilizations. Most thoughts. I'm more like the contrast between the upper city and the ground level, where the wealthy people live their lives as though gravity never stopped working. Willa is also hilariously inept at going undercover. Joshy's thoughts. I really like that this comic inverts the world of the rich living above us, so to instead be living below us in this inverted gravity world. J'ai thoughts. Capitalism has entered the chat. Of course, Jade immediately spotted the tragic figure of a mother forever clutching her baby in death. It's like James Cameron's Titanic, but in space. Based on his silhouetted form with narrowed eyes in the second last panel of the last page, Roger Barrow definitely won't turn out to be a villain. No siree. Joshy's reply. They included the mother clutching her baby in part to offset the silliness of the shark in space in the same panel. They actually were sad they didn't get to include a shark in the weather event of issues 4 and 5. Skyward 2018 Issue 3 Recap. Before the magnetized boots, Roger had to deal with larger issues like starvation. Humanity had to rethink farming, irrigation, cattle, delivery of food and goods. The production line itself changed because it all relied on gravity before G-Day. Roger knows that even Crazy Nate is brilliant enough to work out a fix to the low-gravity situation, but that doesn't work for Roger, who made his fortune off of G-Day. And if the world goes back, in his eyes, he'd have nothing. When Willa refuses to tell Roger her home address, even when he tries convincing Willa that she doesn't want to be trapped in a world where she can't soar through the air, he magnetizes her boots fully to the floor and punches her multiple times, attempting to drive an answer out of her. Willa headbutts Roger, and a security guard tases her, demagnetizing her mag shoes, which gives her an opportunity to escape. Willa locates Joan, who is a cleaner for Edison, who is part of a rich family, but they force him to use a wheelchair he doesn't need when he's on street level, so his family and society can pretend the world hasn't changed. Joan cuts Willa in hiding in a laundry cart, going down an elevator shaft which was emptied for the help, while the rich and affluent who can afford the mag shoes use the elevator normally. After walking past a seminar on the safest way to fornicate in low gravity, security attempts to secure and search the laundry cart. Willa, to save Joan's job, fakes taking Joan hostage to kill her, then flees. Joan makes out with a female guard, semi-ironically called Karen, to distract them while Willa doubles back and escapes the building. Willa arrives home to find her home trashed, droplets of blood in the air, leaving Willa worried that the worst has happened. Issue 3 thoughts by the comic reading community. J'ai thoughts. Time to take out the trash. Roger Barrow is a villain. Such shock. Jade hopes Joan and the security guard have 1 million babies. Speaking of which, Jade read this issue on public transportation. Hopefully none of the other passengers glanced over her shoulder when she got up to the "and this is the safest way to make love" in a low-gravity scene. Wob thought that this is the issue where it starts to feel a little cliche for them, though we still enjoyed it, especially the little details like the office cubicles stacked in each other. Most thoughts, there's some interesting world building in the issue that Amo enjoyed. Henderson raises some good issues, questions such as how would you solve problems like farming and food production in low gravity? The reveal that Edison escaped his wealthy family because they forced him to live in a wheelchair even though he no longer needed it was also heartbreaking. 2018 Issue 4 Recap. Turns out it wasn't Roger doing the home invasion. It's the attempted milk thieves, trying to put themselves through college. Willa and Nate punch out and tie up the milk fiends. Nate discloses that going outside would mean admitting cowardice and not rescuing Lily on D-Day in his head. Willa responds appropriately, conking her father out with the back end of the lamp stand to the back of his head. She then duffels him up and takes him to Shirley's depot, narrowly avoiding Roger's jetpacked goons. Willa and Nate, who after freaking out upon waking up, learns that Edison was kidnapped by Roger and they're willing to do a human exchange for Nate. Willa comes up with a bonkers rescue plan for Edison, but before she can pull together the equipment she needs, Nate leaves, going outside for the first time in 20 years to protect Willa, putting herself in danger. Nate, however, has no idea what storms post-G-Day look like. He's never been outside to see one. We end the issue with Nate caught in the storm, which is a giant bubble of water floating through the air. Issue 4's thoughts. J'ai thoughts? That's no moon? So robbers from issue 1 genuinely want to steal milk? Also, Nathan Fowler is totally going to get first-hand experience of what it's like to be an ant fighting surface tension. Hammond's thoughts. Hammond found this issue to be slightly frustrating. Nate's severe anxiety and agoraphobia is an understandable and very realistic response to the trauma he experienced 20 years ago. But Henderson doesn't seem to know quite how to deal with this narrative thread, so it's almost hand-waved away at the end of the chapter as Nate heads out into the world on his own. The artwork of the rainstorm is quite beautiful, though. Wobb's thoughts. Wobbs loved the storm and how it was foreshadowed a few pages before. The reveal of the storm over the city is easily Wobb's favorite panel. It looks great, but it also highlights how different the world is and the new challenges that it presents. Skyward, 2018, Issue 5 recap. Willa, equipped with scuba gear, goes into the storm after her dad. She empties the air tank to create an air pocket in the storm they can both breathe in, and pulls a Heimlich to force water out of Nate's lungs. After handing Nate her gun as a precautionary manner and hatching a plan to infiltrate Roger's building to rescue Edison while surrounded by the storm, Willa creates an air bubble around her fist, holding a gun so the gun will operate, then shoots through the glass. Just in terms of the science here, according to an episode of Mythbusters, handguns and magnums will fire underwater, whereas shotguns won't, but the handguns will only fire a single shot and are unable to reload thanks to the pressure the water exerts on the chamber, and the target must be within less than 3 feet in order for the handgun's bullet to prove deadly. So while Roger is incorrect in his statement the guns won't work underwater, Willa, by creating the air bubble from her snorkeling tank, greatly increased the gun's efficiency. The bullet might have still broken the glass given she was almost right up next to it, but the water would have applied a lot more force to the bullet. Willa loses her scuba air tank while rescuing Edison, which Roger, left behind by his scaredy cat guards and malfunctioning shoes not designed for exposure to moisture, uses to survive the storm entering his building. Roger ambushes Nate, Willa, and Edison, stealing Willa's gun from her holster and whamming Edison out cold with a swing to the head of Willa's metal scuba tank, holding Willa at gunpoint in anger that Nate wants to ruin everything Roger's built. When Roger goes to shoot Nate, Willa shoves his arm downward, causing Willa and Roger to rocket upward in the opposite direction of the bullet. Willa and Roger struggle in the air, losing the gun, and Roger uses Willa as a springboard to launch himself back towards the ground, a threat to return for another day. The force applied to her by Roger causes Willa to rocket upwards, away from anything that could save her. Willa closes her eyes while flying through the air, resigned to a fate that she's going to die the same way her mother Lily did. Then suddenly her dad is shockingly there with her, having propelled himself upward. Nate tells Willa that her mother Lily would have been proud of the woman Willa grew up to be, and to read Nate's journal, that she will need to be the brave one, to do what Nate couldn't and fix the world's gravity. He tells Willa goodbye, and then before Willa can react, Nate propels himself upwards, using Willa as a springboard, which flings Willa back towards the ground in safety. His final words are that Willa was correct, the world is beautiful, and he can't wait for Willa to see it all. The issue ends with Willa hopping aboard a train with Nate's journal, noting the proverbial monkey's paw of wishing to see the world, that it came at the cost of her remaining family. Willa doesn't know if she can complete the mission Nate gave her, but she will try for him, for all of humanity. As a trivia note, Nate theorizes about if there would be giant bugs as part of adaptive evolution in response to the low-growth environment and many insects' rapid reproductive cycles. An answer to this theory is provided in issues 6 and 7. Issue 5's thoughts. J'ai thoughts. Bum bum ba. Willa might shape up to be a decent hero if it only took the deaths of both parents to get there. Joshy's thoughts. Artistically, this is the most beautiful of the 5 issues for me. Between the panels outside and inside the storm, and the final handful of pages with Willa and Nate in the sky, with that shot of the city skyline once Nate has unalived himself, it's all impeccably drawn. Plot-wise, the scuba canister disappears after Edison is taken out with it. It's not seen on panel again for the remainder of the issue. If Nate had grabbed it before jumping up, there might have been enough air to push the 2 of them back down towards Earth. I know for the sake of the narrative that can't happen, but it felt like a dangling loose thread. I am curious if anybody was shocked by how Nate sacrificed himself. Was it a good death? A selfish death? Does it glamorize suicide too much? Are Wobb's thoughts. Wobbs thinks the idea of sky scuba diving and creating air bubbles in the water is great. The writers and artists do a great job of exploring a single concept, like minimal gravity, in a variety of ways without it becoming gimmicky. Plus, little moments like the rain collection pots between buildings do a great job of visual world building. Amos thought this was an effective conclusion to the first arc of the story. Between Willow's rescue of her dad in the rainstorm and Edison's rescue from Roger Barrow, there's plenty of action to keep the reader engaged. Amo did find it frustrating, though, that Nate's storyline ended the way it did. It would have been interesting to watch Nate heal from his trauma and his guilt and overcome his anxiety. General discussion. Skyward was always planned as 3 lots of 5-issue arcs, according to the creators. For Joshi, this series is the kind of indie comic I love reading. Doesn't take itself too seriously, a bright and vibrant world, but still packed with dark moments and plot twists that shock, and just impeccable, beautifully drawn artwork that just captivates you and just brings so much characterization in addition to the narrative plotting. Its overall thoughts? In the beginning, Willett is almost inseparably high energy, but Jade realizes that this perkiness is necessary for the meeker reader to get through an objectively grim story. Willow's Little Mermaid hair was neat, though. Jade's brain was having a hard time suspending disbelief. Surely issues that astronauts encounter from long missions would become worldwide chronic diseases. Google the effects of spaceflight on the human body. There was a comment in comic about giant bugs, but Jade thought these shouldn't exist anymore in real life because of oxygen levels. One would think gravity turning off would have a devastating impact on oxygen-producing plants. Jade has seen some covers for future issues with giant bugs and will need an explanation. Noting that this seems to be a complete series, it is only 3 trade paperbacks altogether. Jade is contemplating reading the whole series, if only to see how this worldwide disaster was created and how it will be, Jade presumes, fixed. Also, the impact on people who have known no other life or have found that the disaster improved their lives would be interesting/dreadful to explore. Jade really liked the green cover with the hint of red drama in front of the 3rd chapter/issue. The pink cover in front of the 2nd chapter is giving a cool vibe. But Jade thinks this suggests a level of coolness that our protagonist perhaps does not in fact embody. Ha ha!
Seal's thoughts. In general, really enjoyed this and all the angles they managed to have on with the premise. Totally emphasised with Willa's dad. If this was the world we lived in, I'd probably stay home for the rest of my life too. Very tempted to read the rest at some point to see how all the character drama unfolds and what other positives worlds have done to cope. Steele's favourite panel, the light bit of humour. Honestly, the rainwater globule was a close second for the spectacle alone. Steele's favourite cover, issue 5's cover, felt like a great inversion of the floating in the sky motif it had been maintaining, making it look like Willa's and her dad's were falling. Also love how it foreshadows the end of the issue. Steele's favourite character, Edison. His whole story is just the perfect amount of the brilliant world building present here and easily the most intriguing character. It's also kind of cool to see a non-evil character feel empowered by the lack of gravity. Could 100% see how character drama between him and Willa, if she ever gets close to restoring it, could occur. Also, not gonna lie, Edison's pretty hot.
For Wob Slide. This comic reminded Wobbs of 60s and 70s sci-fi authors like Philip K. Dick, who take a concept or idea and make a story around it. In the same vein as Dick, the storytelling isn't the strongest, but it makes up for it in world-building style. And while Wobbs thinks the story is a bit formulaic, he also recognizes that this really serves as an in into a bigger narrative, and it does a good job of getting that going quickly. Wobbs loved the art. The style wasn't really his style, but he thinks the artist has done a great job of capturing movement in every panel without it seeming excessive. A huge shout out needs to go to the colorist. Each scene has its own color palette, capturing emotion, vibe, and location all in one. It should be a mess, but they've done a few little things to keep it together. The first is the saturation. Despite the different palettes, the color saturation is mostly the same, giving it a smooth, seamless feel. They also put the character skin tones
kept the character skin tones the same and just changed things like the bounce lighting, which puts them in the scene and gives a sense of visual continuity through the book. Overall, Wobbs enjoyed this. While the story didn't drive him forward, he'd happily keep reading it for the concept and vibes. 3 out of 5 floating balls of hot coffee. I think this is my favorite panel, and issue 5 is my favorite cover. I'm going to pretend it was for the clever reasons Life and Seal gave, and not just because I thought it looked pretty. This is a decent comic with an interesting premise and some gorgeous art, but it's held back with some so writing and clunky dialogue, in my opinion. Willa is a very likable protagonist, and the cast of characters around her is also enjoyable. Henderson crafts a fascinating world across these 5 issues, exploring how humans might adapt and change in zero gravity. But Henderson also leaves a lot of gaps, such as how would the Earth continue to orbit around the Sun without any gravity? How would the Earth still have an atmosphere? I would have liked a bit more scientific rigor applied to the premise. Joshy rebuttal there. Just because the Earth's gravity has significantly reduced doesn't mean the Sun's gravity has significantly reduced, so the Earth would still be orbiting around the Sun, theoretically. It'd just be more likely that the Moon may not be orbiting around the Earth anymore, I believe. Although I don't think that idea is ever explored. Favorite panel? Pick the same one as Wobb's. The enormous blob of water hanging in the air over the city skyline is a gorgeous and very striking set piece. If you enjoyed this, you should read the rest of Skyward. It's only 3 volumes, and you're a third of the way through now. Alternatively, try Shadecraft or The Big Burn with the same core creative team, or the first collected volume of Stephanie Brown's 2009 Batgirl series, if you like Lee Garbett's artwork specifically. Comic Club will return in February 2026. We'll be covering Batman Wargames. Wargames is a multi-comic line arc consisting of approximately 39 issues. So obviously I can't expect people to have the time to do that much reading in 2 months, though obviously those who undertake the task will gain the most complete picture of the event. Instead, I'm opting that people read 8 select issues of Batman Wargames from the Batman Detective Comics Robin, Batman Gotham Knights, and Batgirl comic series, with 2 prequel Robin issues and a handful of pages from Identity Crisis issue 5, which was published at the same time as the tail end of Batman Wargames. I'll do a detailed summary of those issues, plus Batman issue 634 and 2005's Infinite Crisis issue 6, and provide very brief connective tissue for the rest of the Wargames event. The selected issues to read will provide the character arcs for Tim Drake and Stephanie Brown during that event, and the main overarching story arc. What comics had Joshy been reading besides the Comic Club book for the previous month? Superman Unlimited, issue 7. It's a single issue focused on John Kent Superman's next steps after the events of Nicole Main's Secret Six series. It's a really solid issue that I recommend reading if you like the character of John Kent. You don't need to read any of the other issues either side in the Superman Unlimited series. The issue has a focus on Kal-El Superman, but every handful of issues will give a single issue focus to another Superman family member. X-Men by Jed MacKay. It guest starred Alpha Flight, a team that I adore. Alpha Flight is Canada's main superhero team. They're at a point where Canada outlawed mutants after the events of Krakoa, where mutants established their own nation, which has since fallen, and half of Alpha Flight were either mutants or public mutant sympathizers. This tore the Alpha Flight team in half, with one half of the team tracking down the other half on the run, who were locating and rescuing mutants that the government was hunting. Turned out the Alpha Flight members still working for the government were double agenting, feeding government intel to the outlaw Alpha Flight members, so they got to the helpless Canadian mutants first, before the Alpha Flight members working for the Canadian government could round them up and imprison them. This got found out, and the government working mutants were incarcerated, but the Canadian government still needed superheroes, so now a large percentage of Alpha Flight are inmates doing superhero work for the Canadian government. Anyway, in this issue, Alpha Flight members Guardian, Puck, Snowbird, Shaman, and Marina Smallwood are sent to help the X-Men, of course, Sarah Summers, leader of the Starjammers, keep Cyclops from being kidnapped by some aliens who wanted to take him hostage to get leverage over the Jean Grey Phoenix, who is superheroing out in space.
I read the first couple of issues of Superman American Alien about the teenage years of the Kansas farm boy era of Clark Kent, written by the controversial writer Max Landis, who's also responsible for the Chronicle movie and the Dirk Gently's holistic detective agency series with Samuel Barnett and Elijah Wood. I read Distilleries The Missionary by Ryan Stegman and Jason Howard, a 3-issue miniseries. It's about a Mormon missionary called Bryce, whose faith is shaken after he catches his wife committing fellatio to a priest while never having fellatioed him. Bryce enters into a partnership with a demonic entity and goes on the hunt for somebody who will regularly give him fellatio and must help this demonic entity defeat a bunch of power-hungry demons along the way. You could tell this was an all-male hetero-creative team with the juvenile nature of how it approached marriage, relationships, and its obsession with fellatio and confirming the main character was well endowed. Fellatio is oral stimulation of reproductive organs for those unaware. I also read We Are Robin, just to confirm that Darcy Thomas does not in fact appear in any of the panels, so basically her first in-canon appearance really is the Tim Drake Robin 2022 series. The Future State Eternal Robin 2 issues are technically set in a non-canon timeline. Part of the We Are Robin series had a massive giant crossover event called Robin War. That was all about the Court of Owls, basically engineering the outlawing of Robins in Gotham, getting any minor sporting Robin adjacent colors rounded up into cages by police, without lawyers in a bid to recruit Dick Grayson to be a Talon. A heads up, if you want to own a physical copy of the May 2026 Comic Club book, you want the one published by DC Comics that has Batman listed first on top of the listing of the two main characters on the title card. We will be specifically covering the Nightwing Laura Kinney Wolverine crossover story, which is only in the DC copy. If you grab the Marvel copy, it will not have that story. Still has some great stories in it, don't get me wrong, like Kevin Smith's Daredevil and Green Arrow crossover, and Jeff the Landshark meeting Crypto, but it will not have the story with Nightwing that we will be covering. And obviously, that story will be covered along with Batman City of Madness. In addition, the Iceman Comic Club book by Luciano Vecchio is finally getting published in full. Pre-orders go up next month. I am so ecstatically excited for this one. And basically, it is really lovely that this Comic Club book is finally getting a full print so that people can own physical copies of it. I plan on getting copies of all of the variant covers, and much deserved by Luciano Vecchio. I'm still slowly chipping away at The Court of the Dead, Nico D'Angelo Adventure by Rick Riordan and Mark Oshiro, which is a spin-off of the Percy Jackson series, and I listened as an audiobook to the entirety of Heated Rivalry, in part because of the current TV show, and I have started listening to Game Changer because some of the events from that book have also been adapted for the TV series.
This is the end of the final official 2025 Comic Club